All right, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the GCC Mental Health Research Cluster, I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Emily Caporello. Dr. Caporello is hosted by Dorina Papagiorgio, who is the founder and leader of our brain-computer interface work group within our cluster. So a few things about Dr. Caporello. So Dr. Caporello is the program director of the Small Business Program in the Division of Translational Research and the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. Dr. Caporello has worked at the NINDS since 2019, leveraging extensive experience and expertise in translational neuroscience program management as a scientific project manager in the NINDS small business. Prior to joining NINDS, Dr. Caporello was the Vice President of Research and co-founder of MindX Corporation, a small business focused on brain-computer interface technology, where she led research collaborations with academic labs and oversaw investigational approval of a novel neural interface device. Dr. Caporello previously worked as a senior neuroscientist supporting neurotechnology development at the Biological Technology Office at DARPA and co-founded CleverPet, a small business focused on automated behavioral training technology. Dr. Caporello received her PhD in neuroscience from the University of California, San Diego, where her research focused on neural mechanism of auditory processing and selective attention in songbird model. So without further ado, Dr. Caporello, it's time for your presentation. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Caporello, for honoring us with your presence. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fernanda. I appreciate that introduction. And thank you, Dorina, for the invitation. I'd love to get started, but actually, since we have kind of a small group, it really would help me, I think, if I could take just a minute to hear from people who are attending of where their interests lie. I'm going to focus this talk on small business funding opportunities and device funding opportunities at NINDS. And I think if you are open to just unmuting and sharing with me, if you have interest in the small business versus academic side, devices or non-devices, that really helped me tailor this presentation. So I'll just open it to any attendees who don't mind sharing very briefly their interests.
Well, I can start. So I do have an interest in small business. I do have a startup company pursuing a small molecule for pain therapeutics under the HEAL initiative. The company is currently also part of a local accelerator where we learn a lot about, how to help help academicians to really venture in the small business area, or at least help startup companies launch and be successful in terms of commercialization of products. So my area is primarily therapeutics. Thank you.
So much, Fernanda. That's helpful. Is there anyone else who wanted to just share their background and interests here?
Okay, so I'll be the next. My name is Nuray Yozbatran. I'm an associate professor in research in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehab at the University of Texas, Houston, here at the medical school. And my interest in BMI actually is originating from a collaboration study, a project between U of H and Rice University, where we used an EEG-controlled BMI system to improve upper limb, recovery, to facilitate the recovery after stroke. And we completed this study, and I thought, and I'm definitely interested more on the academic side to use this technology as a modality for recovery after stroke.
Thank you. And to those who have joined, so I'm going to begin a talk on NINDS funding opportunities, focus mostly on small businesses and devices and funding opportunities at NINDS. And just because it's a small group, I wanted to give the opportunities to anyone who's joining to just share their interest space, so I can kind of tailor what I talk about today to make sure it's meeting the needs of the audience. So if there's anyone else who'd like to just quickly speak up and share their background or their interests related to this subject area, I'm happy to hear that before I launch. I think we'll have plenty of time today to go over the materials I have.
Yeah, I can briefly share. So I'm Sean, I'm a senior at Rice University, and I'm part of a startup that's working on an algorithm that detects stroke and other neurological disorders based on EEG signals. So there's definitely a hardware component to the design as well. Yeah, thank you for the talk today. I guess I'm mainly interested in the small business side of things. Yeah, excited to know about the funding opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'll pause briefly in case anyone else would like to share, and then I can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, Emily, I mean, we had discussed briefly about my research, but so we're interested in optimizing the brain-computer interface, which we have already developed for cortical blindness and lower cranial nerve injuries rehabilitation. So I'd be really interested to hear about opportunities within, you know, the academic environment. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Okay, great. So luckily, I think I have the slides that kind of speak to these interest areas. I'll make sure to highlight some of the things that might be relevant to the people I've heard from so far. And please feel free. Don't feel like you need to save your questions for the end. I'm happy to stop at any time and go over something if there's an aspect of a slide or information that you'd like to hear more about. So happy to make this really interactive today. And thank you again for inviting me. So I am Emily Caporello. I'm the director of the Small Business Program at NINDS. And I will kind of just launch really quickly into telling you a little bit about the mission space that we care about. So NINDS, it's one of the 27 institutes and centers at the NIH. Like many of the centers and institutes at NIH, we are defined by the indications that we serve. In our case, these are neurological indications. NINDS stands for the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. So clearly stroke is one major indication that we support. We also take the lead on indications like epilepsy, neurodegenerative disorders, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, and hundreds of neurogenetic disorders. We do list on our website a number of the indications that we support. But if you have questions about this, please feel free to come to us. We are not the only institute at NIH that supports research and development in aspects of the brain. NIA, for instance, the National Institute of Aging, has a large portfolio related to neuroscience, and they take the lead on Alzheimer's and a number of aging-related indications. NIMH is the National Institute of Mental Health. They take the lead on mental health issues, so schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, treatments or diagnostics or things aimed at understanding those diseases are going to primarily fall under NIMH. And there are several other institutes and centers that also take kind of pieces or indications that are related to brain research. So it's really important to early on identify which institute is the best fit for your project, because that will very much determine what kinds of funding opportunities are going to be open to you. So for this talk, I'm going to focus on funding opportunities that are available through NINDS. Now, our portfolio, I'm going to first focus on the small business portfolio. Our small business funding is about $77 million annually out of NINDS. Out of NIH-wide, the small business funding is over $1 billion a year. This is funding that is mandated by congressional language that states that federal funders of extramural research must commit a certain percentage of their budget to small businesses. And these are disseminated in the form of SBIR and STTR funding grants, Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR, and let's see, small business technological transfer of research, something close to that is STTR. I'll talk a little bit more about the distinction between these two coming up. But basically there's these mechanisms which are congressionally mandated and kind of run through the Small Business Administration that allow us to have this dedicated funding pool specifically for small businesses. In our case at NINDS, working to develop treatments or diagnostics to help us better treat or understand neurological disorders. Our portfolio is highly varied within this space. We support all different kinds of modalities from therapeutics, biologics and small molecules to devices, devices that either treat or diagnose. We fund biomarker development and validation. We fund research tool development. We fund clinical tools. We fund IT and health or telehealth types of things, software specific ideas that are not on here, but are absolutely a growing part of our portfolio. And we also fund a range of activities, kind of phases of this translational development towards commercialization. So we start off supporting those very first transitions from kind of the academic basic research that occurs typically in the academic environment, those first steps towards product development, all the way through first clinical trials or early stage clinical trials. This includes things like your very first hit to lead or preclinical efficacy of a given small molecule or biologic. It could be your very first prototyping activities in the devices world. And then again, stepping through IDE and IND enabling research if that's necessary, then to support early stage clinical research. We do not at the small business level have small business specific funding for pivotal trials, but there are opportunities at NINDS beyond small business that can support that level of research and development. And I will touch on that in this next slide. So what I'm showing here is an overview of the many different types of programs at NINDS that are meant to support different levels of translation of research from very early stages coming out of basic research all the way to market. What is shown in orange here and most of the yellow are run out of the Division of Translational Research. That is where our office and small business program is located. We kind of take that, generally take that ground from the translation of basic science into an application. We kind of carry it more or less to the clinical stage, and then programs coming out of our Division of Clinical Research typically support clinical trials through phase 3 that can then hopefully bring something to be ready to go to market. So there's a variety of programs. It's absolutely the intent that you would start off funding your technology or product in an early phase program. You might sort of advance and go to a different one for a different stage, and then maybe even a third, et cetera, to kind of get your product through this pathway. What's shown in yellow here are programs that have small business specific components. So I know you can't see my mouse, so I'll try to direct you verbally, starting at the top. So we have programs within the Division of Translational Research like BPN, which is shown here and specified as for small molecules, Create Bio, which is for biologics development, TND, which is devices development, and biomarker discovery and validation at the bottom. These are all programs that are run in the Division of Translational Research, focused on bringing those specific modalities, the specific technology types from a preclinical stage to a clinical stage. They each work with having cooperative agreement mechanisms where there are annual milestones that are going to dictate what progress you should be making each year, and your subsequent funding will depend on hitting those milestones. So that is one way that you can get support, whether you are from an academic institute or a small business. I'll touch about this, I'll go through the details of this in a minute for the devices situation and explain that in more depth. But from what you can understand here, please know that there are ways to support small businesses through these programs devoted to bringing certain types of technologies into the clinical stage. The majority of what we fund in our program for small businesses come in the form of SBIR and STTR grants. These are the starred line here, which is small business innovation grants, SBIRs and STTRs. And these can go from your very early proof of concept stage all the way through phase 2 clinical trials. We also in the third category have 2 clinical trial networks that small businesses can access called NeuroNext, which is a clinical trial network that can support all different trials for all different types of innovations. And then StrokeNet, which is a clinical trial network specifically meant to support stroke trials. And those can also support phase 2, and in the StrokeNet case, phase 3 clinical trials. They do not provide funding, but they provide access to a clinical trial network for your product. Since the majority of small business funding from our office does go through these SBIR and STTR grants, I'm going to focus on the next few slides on what those grants are, what they look like, and then I'm going to come back to touch a little bit on these cooperative agreement mechanisms specifically for devices. So SBIR and STTR grants are similar across NIH and in fact across all federal funding agencies. Some of you may have some familiarity with DoD funding, with SBIR funding that comes out of DARPA or DOE. You may be familiar with NSF, SBIR funding. The structure of these is similar across all of these and is kind of part of the Small Business Administration's way that they structure this program. So there are phase 1 grants, which are meant to be feasibility or proof of concept of a technology. And then there's phase 2, which is meant to be kind of further research and development. And then there's the opportunity for later stage funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the majority of what we see come to us are phase 1 and phase 2 studies. Phase 1, what counts as feasibility, what counts as a phase 1 or proof of concept really varies by the type of technology. And it's really up to the applicant to determine whether they're at a feasibility stage or whether they've already shown feasibility and are ready to come in at a phase 2 level. It's good to, if you're not sure if you're ready for phase 2 or if you really are more appropriate for phase 1, this is a great thing to talk about with your program officer. It does vary quite a bit, but sometimes there's shorthands. For instance, we often see in therapeutics development, we often see phase 1 being, up through preclinical efficacy with an initial lead. That's not always the case, but that's often the case. With hardware or devices, often it looks something like a prototype development and a validation, either in a phantom or in vitro or in an in vivo model if necessary. Again, that's a shorthand. That is by no means a rule, and it does vary, but that maybe will give you a sense of what feasibility or proof of concept often looks like in these kinds of studies that come to NINDS. But certainly it's something to talk about with your program officer and see if they agree that your stage feels appropriate for whichever phase you are aiming for. Phase 1 studies can be, they're meant to be proof of concept. Under the Small Business Administration, the cap for these budgets is $256,000 total cost. That's what the Small Business Administration puts as a cap. Now, the NIH recognizes that a lot of biomedical research, even early stage proof of concept, to do it well, to do it rigorously, really does require more funding often. So the NIH has established with the Small Business Administration a number of waivers that are approved by the Small Business Administration, and projects that fit within those waiver topics are permitted to exceed that hard cap. Now, the amount of budget that you can ask for that exceeds the hard cap really varies by institute. This is another place where it's really important to identify what institute your project falls under, because that budget guidance is going to be different depending on where you go. At NINDS, we have a fairly flexible budget for all of NIH. We allow phase ones that fit under waiver topics to request up to $700,000 in total cost within their phase one. We allow these phase ones to go to up to 2 years, and we allow no more than $500,000 in total cost in a given year. So if you have a 1-year phase one, your limit is $500,000. If you go above that, you could go up to $700,000. But again, this would not be the same at every institute and really varies depending on which institute you propose to. In phase two, the Small Business Administration puts a hard cap of about $1.68 million in total cost. Again, under a waiver topic, you could request at NINDS up to $3 million in total cost with no more than $1.5 million per budget year. And that project can be anywhere from 2 to 3 years in duration. The waiver topics that NINDS has approved are listed here. As you'll see, they're fairly broad and hopefully pretty clear to identify whether you fall into them. Things like doing in vivo animal testing, clinical testing, device preclinical discovery and development, which includes prototyping, drug and biologic preclinical discovery. There's also brain initiative specific topics that cover things like developing research tools and technologies to understand neural circuits or cellular interactions, or can record and modulate the brain. So there's, in all honesty, these tend to cover a large number of the projects that come our way. Not all of them, but a large number of the projects that really do need budgets that exceed the hard cap. You do not need a program officer to approve that your project is within these waivers before you apply. And we actually don't provide that confirmation because we have not yet seen that full application. What we can do is we can say, okay, according to your aims, I see you're doing in vivo research for therapeutics development. It certainly looks like you're going to fit into this. I don't think there's any concern with you applying for a larger budget, but that's not required. You are welcome to apply with a budget that fits within our guidance. And if you, as an investigator, think that your project fits within a waiver topic, you are welcome to exceed those hard caps. We will verify once the application has come in that indeed your project does fit a waiver topic. So, we encourage you to talk to us before so that we can say, well, I'm not sure this is going to fit in, this is kind of risky. Or we can say, yes, based on this, you're doing clinical research. I don't think it's a problem. But there's no approval required for you to request that increased budget. I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions, because I know our budget guidance, sometimes we do get questions on this. So I'll just give a quick pause. There is a link here at the bottom that will take you to our website, our page on our budget guidance, which lays this all out as well. Okay. So within,
so it sounds like,
oh, yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question. So it sounds like you have to be part of a NIH recognized institution to be able to apply to these grants. Is that correct?
So your project would need to fall under the mission of one of the NIH institutes. That's right. So that should cover all kinds of products related to health. There should be an institute whose mission fits that space. But say we have someone come to us and say, I want to open a business that is going to, provide services, massage to relieve pain. That may be something where we say, look, you're not developing a new product to treat pain. You're supporting services. It's going to fall outside of what can be supported under small business funding. But if you're developing a product that is meant to, say, treat stroke or diagnose stroke or something like that, it's likely that you fit under the NINDS mission. So determining that institute that your project would fall under the mission space of would be something to figure out early so that you know what kinds of funding opportunities are open to you. Does that answer your question?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
So the project itself doesn't have to be directly affiliated with the institute?
Not at all. No, not at all. Not at all. It's just about finding which institute's mission covers kind of the area that you're working in. By no means does it need to be related to the institute in any way or previously funded by the institute. That's not a requirement. You know, we're not going to look and see if the, I don't know, the studies you cite as preliminary work were funded by NINDS. That doesn't matter at all. We just want to know, okay, if this is a product to treat stroke, that comes to NINDS. If this is a product to treat depression, that's going to go to NIMH. And we just want to make sure we connect you with the right program staff so that you know where to fund your project. But there's no need for any prior relationship or existing relationship with any specific institute whatsoever.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Sure. Okay, so under the small business program, when we're looking at SBIR and STTR grants, if you're in the NINDS mission space, you're developing something to diagnose epilepsy or treat stroke, and you're a small business, the first thing we're going to point you to is the Omnibus. The Omnibus is a funding opportunity announcement that is open to, I believe every institute at NIH is signed on to this, including some other health and human services institutes like the FDA and the CDC. It is meant to be open to any investigator-initiated projects that fit the mission of the Health and Human Services. So this is where the majority of our applications come in. An investigator says, look, I'm trying to develop something for stroke. You say, okay, apply to the Omnibus. You apply to the Omnibus. There's all these different institutes that sign on. NIH says, okay, this is a stroke project, so it goes to NINDS and it comes our way. This is meant to cover any investigator-initiated research, and it's really where the bulk of small business proposals go to. That being said, there are a few focused funding opportunities that are available to projects working in a very specific scope. In our case, these funding opportunities are specifically tied to kind of separate pots of money designated by Congress. Some of you may be familiar with the HEAL initiative, as I know we had Fernanda speak about her involvement getting funding from the HEAL initiative, which is devoted to pain and addiction. We have a specific funding opportunity for small businesses to apply to that allows them to tap into that funding pool. We also have a similar funding opportunity under the BRAIN initiative, which is specifically meant for research tools that will help investigators study the brain and understand how it works. And so applying to that specific funding opportunity gives applicants access to that specified BRAIN initiative pot of money. And then we also have an additional focused funding opportunity announcement for research in the Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease related dementia space, which again allows applicants to access AD and ADR funding that is separately allocated by Congress. So the motivation for, typically, again, this is something that a program officer would help you with. You would send them your project and say, I think I'm supposed to go to the Omnibus or the BRAIN initiative. And our job is really to take a look at your project at your draft Ames page is often what we ask for, your specific Ames page that's listing what you plan to do in the project you're being funded for. And we will help guide you to the appropriate funding opportunity. And one of the reasons we might guide you and say, well, look, you're doing a research tool. This really fits nicely into the BRAIN FOA. One reason that can be an advantage is because it puts you as an applicant eligible for this additional pot of money that would not be available under the Omnibus. The other reason you might not apply to the Omnibus is if you're working in a clinical trial space. NINDS does not support clinical trial applications under the Omnibus. Some institutes do, but NINDS has its own funding opportunity announcement to support clinical trials. So if you are doing any kind of clinical research, very important to talk to your program officer. One reason is because it's important for us to determine early on if your research is going to count as a clinical trial under the NIH definition. And note that the NIH definition is different from the FDA's definition. It may be different from your IRB's definition. So we need to determine, according to NIH, does your clinical study fall as a clinical trial? If it does, then there's going to be different funding opportunity announcements for your project, and there may be different requirements in your application for that project. So absolutely important, especially if you're doing clinical research, to reach out to the program officer that you think is your best guess at being appropriate, and have them help you find the right funding opportunity announcement, the right program officer, the right institute if need be, so that you have plenty of time to prepare the application for the right funding opportunity. In addition, we do support 2 later stage funding opportunities called the Phase 2B and the Commercialization Readiness Pilot. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those today, because those are opportunities specifically open to companies that have been funded at the Phase 2 level. And it makes Phase 2 funded companies eligible for some further support through these mechanisms after they've completed Phase 2 funding. Certainly, if anyone's interested in hearing about that, I'm more than happy. But I think for the most part, this is more people who are interested in starting a funding path with NINDS as opposed to people who are down that path. Please correct me if I'm wrong and there's any interest in those mechanisms. I should note, it looks like, I apologize, that the bottom of this slide is out of date. It was our last funding deadline. The small business funding opportunities are on a standard cycle of application dates that are 3 times a year. The last one we had was January 5th. The next one will be April 5th. And then the one after that is September 5th. It's those 3 dates every year. When those dates fall on a holiday or a weekend, they get pushed to the next business day. So you can kind of, keep in your head, okay, when am I going to get funded, or when is the next application date? Am I going to make it for April? Okay, probably not. Let's plan for September. It's going to be those same dates throughout the year. Typically, an application is funded. So from the time of application to the time you actually get your notice of award is about 6 to 7 months for an application that's successful in that cycle. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you are planning. It is a faster cycle than most academic funding opportunities. We kind of go at an accelerated pace in an effort to try to assist small businesses who really don't have a lot of other funding, we recognize, especially in the very early stages. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Let me pause for a second and see if there's any questions on that small business discussion. I'll just go back here because I'm going to move on next to talking a little bit more broadly about device development and support at NINDS. As I understand, that's an area of interest for a lot of this audience. But let me pause and just see if there's questions on this, the small business funding specific slides I've done.
Yeah, I have a question, or I guess a comment, if you can elaborate a little bit more on this. So I was very fortunate to be exposed to something called the AAP program. I became aware of this through actually around a workshop here at the GCC. We have a number of clusters, and that was through, I think, the drug discovery cluster. And I think that was really essential, basically, to start thinking about creating a startup company. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And I thought, to be honest, that there was not enough advertisement of that program. So if there is a way of maybe just increase the distribution of and information about this program, I think it's fantastic. If you could say something a little bit more about that.
I'm very happy to. I will come back to this, so don't worry, I'm not going to skip over any of this, but I did have a little bit of information here. So that's a great opportunity to talk about this program. And thank you, Fernanda. I'm so happy that you had the opportunity to participate. So the Applicant Assistance Program is specifically intended for small business applicants who have not yet been funded by NIH. Their business, the company, has not yet been funded by NIH through the SBIR and STTR mechanisms. It's meant to help companies create their proposals and their applications. And participants in this program are provided with a coach to help them create this application, and they are provided with 10 weeks of support in developing this application. This is a great resource, especially for companies who we recognize may not have a long history of applying to places like the NIH to get money. So it's really meant to kind of help get over what is a very steep learning curve with some individualized coaching. Now, your AAP coach is not a grant writer. They will not write it for you. They're really there to be a coach, to help you, to give feedback on how you're constructing your application, to clarify policy, to help make sure you're doing things the right way, and to generally try to help you build a strong application. But you are the one responsible for writing and submitting that application. There are a number of institutes that participate in this. Last year, it was just 4 of us, NCI and NINDS, NIA and NHLBI. This year, the program has expanded. We have now 8 institutes and centers. Yes, my darling, I can't help right now. I'm so sorry, I'm on a call. Okay, I have to talk right now. Can you ask Bida? Okay, maybe go downstairs and ask her. Thank you so much. I love you. Okay, well, maybe just take off. Great. Thank you, love. So sorry. Forgive the interruption. I think they know when we're talking. It's the perfect time to come in. Okay, so where was I? So now there's 8 institutes who participate in this program. We run a cohort of applicants every cycle. So this in April is going to be the next, I apologize again, this says December, but the next cohort will open in April. The application portal to participate in AAP will open in April. And that's for a cohort of applicants who are going to submit a phase 1 application in September. At this time, the program is only open to phase 1 applicants. That's just because the phase 2 applications are, they have a lot more components, et cetera. So we limited it to phase 1 for now. If you are a company who is interested in putting a phase 1 application in September, I highly recommend reaching out to me or to the AAP through the AAP page to one of the other institutes if you feel your technology is more appropriate there, and we can help give you information and learn about this program. Go ahead, Fernanda.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, one thing I just want to add is that in my case, I didn't have the company formed yet. So I wanted to, but the AAP program helped me even with, the significant amount of paperwork to create the company. So I think we, within that 2-month period, I created a company with their help, like legal help kind of, and submitted the NIH grant. I think while obviously maintaining my full-time job in the academia, I think that without that, it wouldn't have been possible. And we hope, actually, that was a feedback we provided to the program. In that, I think we partner with Eva Garland for us, and we really would like possibly to extend it to the phase 2. I know it's more complicated, yes, but we really think that would be fantastic. So
absolutely, I think that's on. There's a lot of talk about expanding this program, and that's one of the top. One of the things at the top of the list is allowing phase 2 applications to come in here. And I think this is growing. So it was piloted initially a few years ago, and then it was reworked. We reworked the program, and then just relaunched it last year. It's absolutely been something that we've had a lot of positive feedback on, a lot of interest in, and it's kind of growing across NIH. So yes, I hope it will continue to expand in scope and the number of institutes that participate, and absolutely encourage any new small business applicants to NIH to really look at this as an option, even if it delays your initial application by a cycle, because you were really hoping to submit in April. I really think that overall your likelihood of doing well in this process is probably going to be better off waiting and trying to go through this program and then submitting. So thank you so much, Fernanda, for bringing this program up. While I'm on this slide, I will just also note some of the other resources that I would highly advise taking a look at. So our program just hosted a pre-application webinar in November. This is really about tips and tricks for small business applicants to NINDS. It goes through a lot of our specific policies, FAQs, those kinds of things. And it is available on our website under the Entrepreneurial Resources tab. It's linked here, though I realized in the PDF versions I sent out, I did not link the website. So I'm happy to supply that, Dorina, to you, or I can kind of copy paste it in the chat or something so that you guys can access that webinar. What would be most helpful?
That'd be great, Emily, if you would like to send it, then GCC can distribute it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll send it to you in an email because I know that didn't make the PDF. And it really is helpful. It's about an hour-long webinar. The slides are also available separately if you'd rather not sit through the webinar, but just kind of want to see what was on the slides. You can check those out as well. There's also the main NIH SBIR website is fantastic. It has recently undergone a lot of an overhaul to make it easier to navigate. It's a wealth of information, including things like sample applications, a lot of FAQs that are really well thought out, due dates, budget guidance, all sorts of really helpful information. So I encourage you to read through the information offered on that website, as well as our website, which is linked there, which will go through some of the funding opportunities, et cetera, some of our resources like our webinar. And then also we encourage applicants to take a look at Reporter, kind of put in your study, what you're proposing. It can help you identify the appropriate institute and the appropriate program officers. It can also help you identify whether there's been work that's similar to what you're doing funded by the NIH, and sometimes that's really informative. You can kind of understand if you're in a gap space where there really isn't a lot of funding in your space, which can often be an advantage. Or you can also see if there's other companies funding different similar things, sometimes it's really good to know that you have companies working in the same space. So that's another resource that I highly recommend taking a look at. And then of course, as I've been saying all along so far, I really recommend reaching out to program staff directly and very early. And I mean like 2 to 3 months before you are going to apply. The more time you have to say, okay, I know what institute I'm going to, I know what funding opportunity I'm going to, I know whether or not I have a clinical trial, having that in place before you're actually starting to build the application and pull in the team is really helpful. And it can take, especially when we get close to these timelines, over a month to get on a calendar sometimes. We have such a large number of applicants and inquiries coming to us that our calendars just get really crazy leading up to the submission deadline. So reaching out well in advance is highly, highly recommended so we can get you on the right track with plenty of time. Okay, and now I'm going to pop back to expand the discussion to some of the device funding opportunities, both within and outside of small business. So let me go to here. Okay. So what I'm showing here is an overview of how NINDS funds work in the devices space, supporting neurological indications or overall brain research, starting with very early kind of basic research, academic research, all the way through to clinical trials. And I'm going to focus on 2 opportunities, but I just wanted to walk through this kind of general pipeline that you could walk through. In this medium blue here are funding opportunities within NINDS. In this dark blue are funding opportunities under the BRAIN initiative. There are some similarities between these two. And sometimes it's the case that a project that, the same project may be a fit under NINDS device support or under BRAIN support. And that's where talking to a program officer can really help. Certainly, if your device or tool is really focused on understanding mechanisms, that's going to really be a good fit for BRAIN. If it's heavily focused on a specific neurological indication, it may be a better fit under the NINDS funding opportunities, but that's where a program officer could help you. In this case, Nick Langles at NINDS is the devices lead. So he's a great person to go to point you to which of these many funding opportunities appears like the right fit. So he's a good first step. You're also welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to try to loop you into the appropriate person. I want to focus today on 2 specific funding opportunities, which are really at that level of getting from kind of a pre-IND, so past early prototype development stage. That work, prototype development, can be funded under SBIR, under our SBIR grants, or if you're an academic, you could be funded under these U01s for kind of the device development in early stage product development. A U01 is often perfect for that. Once you're at the point where you are getting ready, you're about a year or two away from getting your IDE, your investigational device exemption from the FDA, which will permit you to begin clinical studies. Once you're at that phase, you're probably ready to look at these cooperative agreement opportunities under NINDS and under the BRAIN Initiative. And I'm going to talk about those in more detail. They're kind of sister opportunities that are meant to support technologies through obtaining that IDE and then into the clinical trial portion, the first in human portion. So the Translational Neural Devices program has an academic track and a small business track. Again, it's going to support 1 to 2 years of research leading up to obtaining an IDE, and then 2 to 3 years of research actually performing your first in human clinical trial. This is a heat map that kind of indicates the types of technologies and indications that have come into this program to date or have been funded by this program to date, with green being more of them, more frequent. So you can see we've seen a number of projects in the epilepsy domain, in pain, in Parkinson's, in spinal cord injury, and stroke. A lot of DBS is the modality, though not exclusively. We see neurostimulation, ultrasound, spinal cord stimulation, EMG, neuroprosthetics. So this is not by any means to dictate the scope of what is allowed, but just giving you an example of the types of projects and technologies that have been funded by this program to date. And then the sister program there under the BRAIN Initiative is the BRAIN Initiative, either UG3, UH3, the academic version, or the U44, which is the small business version. Again, this is taking you from a couple years, 1 to 2 years out from an IDE, and then funding your clinical trial for 2 to 3 years after that transition point. Both of these, again, have annual milestones that are negotiated with NINDS and must be met to get your next year of funding. They do have larger budget limits. So for both BRAIN and TND, I think it's about up to $1 million a year in phase 1 and up to $1.5 million a year in phase 2. So the overall budget you could get could be up to $2 million in phase 1 and up to $4.5 million in phase 2. It could be a larger overall budget available through these programs than through the grant mechanisms under SBIR or I believe the U01. It's another reason to look at these particular funding opportunities. And then just a quick plug from the BRAIN Initiative side for the BRAIN Initiative Investigators Meeting. This is an open meeting. It is free to register for. It is hosted by NIH, and while it features research supported by the BRAIN Initiative, you do not need to be funded by the BRAIN Initiative to attend. Hopefully, it will have some talks or sessions that are of interest to your area of research. So please take a look. And the registration will be open all the way through the start date, which is June 15th. So I recommend taking a look at that. I think that was it, other than I'll talk about some of the SBIR support for funded companies. But perhaps before I jump to that, I know this is a complicated slide as I back up to it here. Are there any questions that I can help for I know there's a few of us that are really interested in the academic side support for devices. Are there any questions on this that I can kind of help answer regarding the academic side of support at NINDS for devices? I'll do my best, even though I'm not Nick, but I'll try my best.
I have a question. I'm not sure. That's basically a main question. I want to start a company, and I read the instructions. Oftentimes they said that if you're a professor, can you be the head of the company, or you have to assign someone in terms of less than or more than 50%? Can you clarify that? Because I'm always confused about that.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to talk about that. So yes, you're referring to the PI work requirements for the SBIR and the STTR mechanism. It is true that the PI of an SBIR application must be primarily employed by the company. That's the language that's in the sort of law or the policy. Different institutes, I've heard of different ways that they implement that. They implement what primarily employed means, which might be why it's so confusing, because you hear different answers from different people or institutes. At NINDS, we look to see that the person, by primarily employed, we do not mean that they are working, 21 hours a week at the company, more than, for more than half time or more than 20 hours. We would not consider that primary employment. If the PI needs to show they do not have full-time employment somewhere else. So we would not, for instance, accept someone who has a full-time academic appointment who has started a company to be eligible as the PI on an SBIR. That being said, the STTR mechanism allows for the PI, the contact PI, to be either primarily employed by the small business or primarily employed by the institute. So what you can do, if you are an academic, a full-time academic who has started a company, you can propose as an STTR, and your time can be attributed to the small business. That's fine. You can sort of put your effort on the small business side if appropriate, but it would allow you to be the PI. The other way around it, say you're like, look, yes, I'm a full-time academic, but my lab's not involved in this. It's just my company doing something. You could be a multi-PI on an SBIR. You would need a contact PI who is primarily employed by the small business, but you could be a multi-PI. There's no restrictions about the affiliation of a multi-PI. So that's another way that we make this work with people. They may find somebody who's employed by the company to be the contact PI, and they, the academic investigator, are on that proposal as a multi-PI. So those are kind of the two options if you are an academic investigator who started a company and wants support through small business funding. Does that help explain that?
Yeah. Does that, the latter part, does that apply to SBIR or just STTR?
The MPI part?
Being, so that you assign a contact PI and then...
Yeah, so the policy is only for the contact PI. Okay. So under the SBIR, the contact PI must be affiliated primarily with the small business. Okay. In an STTR, the contact PI can either be primarily affiliated with the small business or primarily affiliated with the academic institute that's a partner on the grant. There are no restrictions for the multi-PI. So in any case, the multi-PI, the affiliations don't matter. So that's one way that you can sort of have a PI role without fitting those, but you would need a contact PI who fits those requirements.
Okay, so then does the contact PI needs to have the expertise in the area or not?
Yeah, so it's important, so that can be hard. So you need to show that that person who's the contact PI is an appropriate PI, person to be a PI. Now, there are ways that this is done. Of course, we often have grad students or postdocs who go out and be the person spinning the company. So what I recommend in that case where you're really looking to someone more junior being listed as the contact PI, it can be an issue. The things you can do to mitigate it are to make sure you're pulling in some very strong expertise, both technical expertise, say from you as the MPI coming from the academic institution, but perhaps also through consultants who are providing lots of business and leadership expertise, and really try to build a team where you can say, okay, this is the first time that this person is going to be leading something, but we are bringing in a strong support team to help this junior person be effective as the PI. And so it takes a little bit of work and structuring on your part, but that is what I would recommend if that's really the way that you want to go, is make sure you are bolstering that junior person with a lot of expertise and sort of, being proactive about making sure that they are getting the support they need to be effective as a leader. But it can, I'm not going to lie, sometimes there are reviewers who say this person's too junior to be leading this. So it's something to think about in how you structure your team.
Okay. One of the last question is that does NIH consider like give priority to women's own business, 51% or more?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do state in our priority statement, which I will include in the links to send out today. The language in our priority statement does say a specific aspect of our mission is to support women and minority led businesses. So it is something that we look at as one of the many different priorities. We do take a look at whether there are women or minority owned businesses as a factor in overall funding recommendations and due diligence. So there's a couple ways that you can note this. So that one of the most important ways for us to know that you're a women-owned small business is that the company is registered with the Small Business Administration as a woman-owned or minority-owned small business, or a woman and minority-owned small business. There's a process that you would go through with the SBA where that can be certified. And what that will do is, if you are certified small business in your registration with the SBA, that will let us know on our end that the business is women-owned or minority-owned, and it's part of the tracking that we normally do. So it really shows up for us. That being said, there are a lot of companies that are not registered as such or not certified as women or minority owned. And we would encourage you then to make sure you're indicating in your application somewhere that, the ownership structure, et cetera, of the business, so that we can make sure we're aware of any women or minority owned small businesses that are applying to us. Because sometimes otherwise we don't necessarily know what the structure is.
So what you're saying is that the company has to register both locally and also at SBIR, is that correct?
So to apply for SBIR funding, you have to be registered with sam.gov, which is the Small Business Administration's system for registering eligible small businesses that fall under their umbrella. So that requirement is necessary in order to apply for SBIR funding from NIH, but I think for all SBIR and STTR funding, even in defense, et cetera. And it does take a while. It can take up to 6 weeks sometimes. So it's something to do early on before you would begin your application is to get that sam.gov application in. It's not very taxing on your end. You have to have your EIN, you have to have your DUNS number, and your company has to be formed. You have to submit all the information, but it's not so hard to actually fill in and submit it. It's just that it takes a very long time for them to process it and actually leave you registered with the government. But that is a prerequisite for being able to apply for any SBIR or STTR funding.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And then I'll just
to follow up on that.
Yes, go ahead.
Just to follow up on that. So if the head of the small business, he has no full-time academic position, but he happens to be a full-time physician at a hospital, how would that complicate things?
So again, we would look at that and determine that they are not primarily employed with the small business. If they have a full-time position outside of that small business, we would consider that to be their primary employment. So it's going to be important to have somebody who's the contact PI who is primarily employed by the small business. If you're pursuing an SBIR, if you're looking at an STTR, you may be able to be more creative. If that physician affiliation, for instance, is a university, if it's a nonprofit, if they're a physician at UCSF and you're working with UCSF in your project, then they could be the PI because they'd be primarily affiliated with the partnering institution in the STTR. But if that's not the case, then you might have to find somebody else.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, quick question.
Sure.
Most of the professors are on a 9 months appointment. And so can you use the summer, work as a means to, to get that percentage?
So you can absolutely attribute your level of effort under the company and use up that summer months. But what we at NINDS would not approve is saying that you are primarily employed by the small business, because that's still only going to be, you're still going to be 9 months to the university, which would indicate your primary employment is under the university. So you could allocate anytime we actually, if you have an agreement with your university and you say, I'm going to spend 6 months under the company, that's fine. We don't mind, but what we would care about is where that primary employment is. So you can allocate time coming from the company or academic institute however you want, unrelated to your primary employment, whoever dictates your primary employment. We've also had a situation where we had let me back up. The affiliation only matters at the time of the award too. So it is also possible for you to say, right now I am employed by UCSF, but when I am awarded, I am going to leave UCSF and I'm going to be part of the company full time. We've seen people do that. I've seen people also take sabbaticals from their academic periods so that they can be primarily employed by the small business. It depends how your sabbatical works and whether you're still employed. It's a whole mess, but people have pursued creative ways to sort of make that primary employment work. And it is only during the period of the award. It does not have to be at the time of application.
Okay, so then it would be like the future estimation, right?
That's right. That's right. So you basically need to commit to say, if we're awarded this, I will be primarily employed by the small business. Yeah. So that would be fine. You could do that.
Thank
But
you.
you wouldn't be able to be awarded until you had certified that indeed you are now primarily employed by the small business. Okay, and I'll just go, this is the last slide. I have 2 last slides and then we can open up to any other questions. Any of the wonderful questions coming from this audience. Thank you so much. I just want to note that there are some types of support that we try to offer to small business awardees that are outside of just your funding. One is for phase 1 companies specifically. We really try to help build up the business expertise in companies through programs like I-Corps and C3I. These are specifically programs that where you work with entrepreneurs and residents and coaches and guides to really help build out your business plan and test that in a number of customer discoveries and kind of supply chain, discoveries, talking to people and conducting at least 100 interviews with people who are either customers or somewhere in your chain, so that you can work out the realities of your business plan and really firm up your go-to-market plan. And we do this in phase 1 because when you come for phase 2 funding, you really need to present a very comprehensive commercialization plan that walks through how you're going to go to market and how you're going to be successful in selling your product and manufacturing your product and et cetera. So these programs are really meant to help build your company proficiency and your business plan in this way. And it's free. This is a free program to phase 1 recipients. You simply need to apply to the program. We send out announcements about it. It is a very kind of intensive 10 weeks where you are spending a lot of time on the phone talking to people about what they think of your product. But we've heard from almost every company that has participated that it's been extremely, extremely helpful when building out a realistic plan and their knowledge of the space that they're working towards. Another thing that we offer is a needs assessment of the company through technical and business assistance. Technical and business assistance, or TABA, is kind of a separate allocation of funding under the SBA. And it's complicated, but essentially the NIH is using that funding to offer all phase 1 companies funded by NIH the ability to undergo a needs assessment by a contractor whose expertise is in looking at companies and determining where their weak spots are and helping to provide guidance in, really where you could use extra help. And it can really be helpful to have that outside kind of evaluation to help you to get a judgment on your strengths and weaknesses as a company. So we offer that for free to all phase 1 recipients at NIH. And then for all companies, whether you're phase 1 or phase 2, we do have supplements to promote diversity. Specifically, these are supplements to awardees that will support a research project for a new employee who's diverse as according to the NIH applicable definitions, but this is meant to bring in a diverse workforce into the life sciences industry and pathway. So these are, it'll help you bring in a new employee. It will help you do a little bit more extra research on your project. And then we also have innovator support consults. So these are entrepreneurs in residence and regulatory experts who are on the payroll here at NIH, who will consult with all companies funded under the NIH. We often work with them and help our companies navigate some tricky business and regulatory issues with this support. And then we also regularly send companies who are in a position to be fundraising for additional capital. We will send them from NIH funding to a number of, to present at a number of fairly large partnering meetings in the life sciences space. This includes Bio, Resi, Life Sciences Summit. We at NINDS have historically also sent companies to neuro-specific partnering conferences, and these are opportunities for companies to basically pitch to an audience of investors. And we also provide support to develop those pitches and develop kind of 2-page summaries on the company that you can send to potential investors. So we really do try to not only be a check to the company, but to, in some cases, act whatever degree we can, like an incubator or accelerator, to really provide support to the business growth and maturity as well, to improve the company's chances of garnering additional funding. Because we know that when you reach the end of NINDS or NIH SBIR funding, a lot of these technologies are not yet ready for market. They require investments of tens, sometimes hundreds of millions to actually get to market. And so we're really, our goal is to get you to a milestone or an achievement point in your technology where you've been de-risked enough to be adopted by a larger investor or acquired by a larger company, or to execute a deal with a large pharma or large device manufacturer. That's often where we are, not always. Sometimes we have digital tools or research tools where we carry them all the way to the point where they have sales, and that's wonderful when that happens. But we know in a lot of our therapeutics and medical devices, we're only getting you part of the way there, and so we try to have these kinds of support opportunities to help companies be successful in getting to that next stage. With that, I think I just had put a few FAQs on here. Some we've touched on, really just to seed conversation about some of the things that we often hear. A big question is, how often are SBIR and STTR applications funded? The answer is that varies quite a bit. The percentages fluctuate wildly between institutes, between years, but the rates are published. It ends up coming out to about 20% on average of applications are funded. Though again, there is a lot of variability year to year and institute to institute. But there's a link there that will point you to all the success rate data. I talked a little bit about this. It's about 6 to 7 months from the time of application to the time of submission. 6 to 7 months from the time of submission to the time a notice of award gets your way and there's money in your account. So keep that in mind when you're planning. It does sound like a long time, but honestly, even private investment often takes relationship building for a year or longer from the time when you sort of start those discussions to when there's money in your account. So don't let it discourage you. Any path to a check for your company is kind of going to be a long road, and you should pursue all of them simultaneously. I would never recommend putting all of your ducks into grant funding or angel funding or whatever. You kind of pursue everything that you possibly can. And then what advice? Really, what I really want to stress is, let's take the 20% success rate. That's what it would be this year. That means it's very likely that you may not be successful in getting funded your first time. And it can be very discouraging to work very hard in a grant and have it be not discussed or not scored and in a review. Persistence is definitely the key with this type of funding. I really encourage applicants to reach out to the program officer to discuss the feedback from the reviewers, to really think about resubmitting, because often, not always, asterisk on not always, but certainly most of the time we do see applications improve when they take into account reviewers' comments and concerns. And sometimes those review comments can be really helpful. I mean, that's what they should be. Hopefully they are constructive and helpful. I know that's not always how they seem, but the goal is for them to point out things that are weaknesses in the proposal that could hopefully help you rework that proposal and make it a better proposal that you can resubmit and hopefully score better on and be funded for. So I would say, work in the expectation that it might take a resubmission or even possibly two to get to a point where it's a strong proposal that reviewers are scoring as something that they're excited about and that's highly meritorious, because it is a competitive program, but you sort of get as many times to resubmit at the phase 1 level as you want. So it's just good to keep that in mind. It might take a couple of rounds to get funded, especially if it's your first time going through this process. That I will stop and I will open up to any questions. I understand we have a while to talk, and I'm happy to stay on.
I have a question on the I-Corps program. I know that we missed the deadline in just last month. Do you expect that they will have another opening next year?
I do. So I'm not part of overseeing that program. It goes out of NCI. And so I should caveat that I don't know whether or not it's been approved. From NCI has to reapprove it, et cetera. I don't know if that's happened, but I-Corps is a beloved program and one that we count on. So I absolutely anticipate it's going to be continued. I haven't heard anything about it slowing or stopping down, but I do not know if they've received sort of the official reissue approval yet. But I absolutely, as someone not involved, and so don't hold me to it, but I believe that will be continuing. It's absolutely something that all the institutes that participate in it really, really love, and so do the companies. So I don't see it going anywhere.
How about the C3I program?
C3I, I believe, is also happening this summer. Yeah, so that one happens annually. We believe applications, it's kind of in 3 parts that occur late spring, summer, early fall. The announcements for those usually go out around the April and May timeframe. And I believe that they're on as scheduled to hold that program this year. And yes, the C3I program for everyone else is very similar to I-Corps, but it is specifically designed for device development. I-Corps is more generalized, and I'd say that the type of expertise that's often in the I-Corps experts is often therapeutics development. They kind of developed C3I to be more device centric, to give more device specific guidance. So it can be a really good option if you're in the device space.
And then those requirements for the I-Corps is similar to the SBIR and STR.
So at I-Corps, yeah, this is actually an important distinction as well. So I-Corps is only open to phase 1 recipients. So small businesses that have received a phase 1 can participate in I-Corps. And there, I don't believe you have the same requirements about who the PI of that I-Corps group is. I think the requirements are just that you're bringing in someone who's kind of scientifically involved in the program. Usually that's the PI, but not always. Someone who is a C-suite level person from the company, and then an expert in the field, some kind of third party market expert who you bring in on your team. I don't think you have to fit the same requirements that the PI on that supplement be the contact PI, SBIR. That's a great question though, but I believe I've seen cases where that PI of that supplement isn't the PI of the overall project. But feel free to ask if you're looking at that program. Feel free to email the team about that and to verify that your team would be a fit for the requirements. But C3I is really interesting. The C3I program, you do not need to be an NIH funded company. You can be an academic PI, an NIH funded academic PI who is doing translational research in the devices space, and you can apply for the C3I program. So that's a great point, and that's another website that I can make sure to add to the list of websites I'm going to send out for resources, because that might be really relevant to this group. It can actually really help you to think about whether it's worth forming a company or not around your technology.
Yeah, I actually have a question that follows up with Nikki's question about iCorps. So can actually one use iCorps as a recruitment tool? Like, for instance, you want to recruit someone that has business expertise in your company. So can you propose that and, just having the person, you again, use it as a recruitment, or maybe having the person kind of associated, not necessarily on the payroll, but maybe just at some type of like role. So I'm not sure how to phrase it, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you'll need to propose the team and the team with those requirements. So it has to be a scientist, a science leader on the project, which is often the PI of the project. It does not have to be. You'll need a C-suite person in the company, and then a third person who is not part of the company, but is a sort of expert on the commercial side of that technology in the field. And absolutely, it's the case that people will often bring that person in specifically for the program. And you need to name them, so you need to know who they'll be, but they do not need to already be somebody in your group. So it's good to say, hey, we'd love to propose iCor. We'd love to have you be the consultant. I believe at least some of that of the funding for the program can go to support the hours of that consultant. So it can be a way to bring in somebody who's an expert and who can participate with you on this team in iCor.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was wondering if you can please talk a little bit more about the exploratory clinical trials under STTR and SBIR.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anything specific, or want me to just kind of?
Just, yeah.
Sure. So our clinical trial FOA, so that's the one on the bottom left here. There's two. There's an STTR version and an SBIR version. So these are open to any study that's considered a clinical trial under the NIH definition. There's a few questions when you go to look at the NIH definition of clinical trials. There's a couple things that are important. So the fact that your technology is or is not invasive is not really a part of that evaluation. What matters is, are you collecting data or measuring something that is going to be used in the treatment of that subject? So are you intervening at all in sort of the course of treatment? Now I'll give a good, what I hope is a good example of the differentiator there. So a lot of times we'll see, say, an EEG technology that is just going to be recording activity, and the company wants to see if their algorithm for seizure detection is as good as the gold standard. So they're collecting data, but they're not actually using that data in any way to interfere with the treatment of the patient. So that would not be a clinical trial. But something where the same company is now going to record the EEG from the patient and then use that data to trigger that a seizure may have happened, and that information is going to go to the treating physician, and they may use that information in adjusting medication. That would be a clinical trial, because now the data that's being recorded is health-related data that's then being used to treat the patient. That's not the only distinction that matters, but I'd say that's a frequent one that comes to us. Are you just observing the patient and then that data is being used to develop the product? or are you observing the patient and then making some kind of intervention? That's a major differentiator that we see that distinguishes a lot of the projects that come to us.
I have a quick question. How about if, you know, there is some treatment, but this treatment is independent of any other treatment that the patient is being given?
It depends.
It doesn't make any difference, like.
Doesn't make any difference. I mean, we definitely have cases where, for instance, you know, there's patients that are naturally undergoing DBS surgery, and the applicant's recording that DBS data, but the DBS is happening by the course of treatment, and they're just kind of, you know, collecting extra data to use, and that's not a clinical trial. But is that what you mean, or is it you're saying a separate treatment? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, potential medications, but that the patient can.
It could be. It likely would. So if they're getting medication, if they're getting something that's definitely going to be like so in the device world, if it's stimulating and having some kind of effect on the body, or if it's a medication given that's going to have an effect, that is likely to count as a clinical trial, even if it is an independent of other types of intervention. But honestly, to know for real, what I would recommend doing is just writing up a description of what the study would look like. You're welcome to send that to me, or if there's a program officer you're also working with, just ask them, you know, do you think this would fall under the definition of a clinical trial? If it's easy for us to figure out, we'll let you know right away. If not, we have, you know, committees and working groups, et cetera, that we can ping to say, you know, I'm not sure about this one, and we can get you a definitive answer so that you know you're applying to the right kind of funding opportunity. And it's important because if you were to apply to, say, the omnibus for a non-clinical trial application, and you're saying this is just clinical research, and NIH said, no, this is a clinical trial, your application would be withdrawn, and you're not going to be able to apply until the next round. So it could really be, you know, a delay in getting your research funded if we don't identify that early on and correctly.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Sure.
Quick question. Will this presentation or any of the link be available to us sometime?
Yes, so I sent a PDF version of the slides that I know can be distributed, and I believe the organizers are going to distribute. And then following this discussion, I've noted a few different links that I think would serve the community of attendees well as well. So I will send those to Dorina and team so that they can distribute those as well.
Thank you.
Sounds great, thank you.
Sure. And I will just put it on the last, just if anyone wants to make sure they capture my email. So that's my email at the top. My colleague, Natalie, I am also a program officer. I hold about half the portfolio. Natalie holds the other half. So we'll direct you to the right person depending on your indication space and what you're working on. There's also listservs that you can sign up on to make sure you hear about announcements. We have Twitter feeds that always, identify workshops or funding opportunity announcements, things like that. And then the websites for NINDS small business and then the NIH small business information are also in that last slide as well. Any other questions from the audience that I can help to address?
Yeah, I guess this is more like a general question. Do you go often to institutions to give talks, or is it uncommon?
To individual institutions, we do sometimes. It's obviously been slowed down a little, but in some ways that helps us. For outreach for our team, we have really tried in the past year to give focus on outreach opportunities that we know are going to meet diverse audiences. So that is one of the major factors for us in saying yes to opportunities, is if we know that we're meeting our program goal of making sure we are conducting outreach to diverse audiences. But we do. It's really just a matter. We're not always able to say yes. The virtual world has made that easier, actually. because, I can pop on here and give a talk to Texas and, pop off and go talk to California tomorrow. So that I think actually makes it easier for us to say yes.
Dorina, do you have any more questions, or still see
This
people?
was, yeah,
People
this
there.
been tremendous amount of information
Yes.
to digest and review the awesome slides. I mean, there's a lot there, but perhaps Emily, in the future we can have. I do not know if you do this through your program, but outreach from different the various managers give us more information, more specifics for each of these mechanisms.
Yeah, I think Nick would be a great speaker, or someone from Nick's team, I think would be really great to give some more information on all those different aspects of the device stuff, especially for the academic side, which I don't know as well. And as you can see, is quite complicated between brain and TND. So I feel like my hope is leaving you guys with at least a couple ideas of where to go to a program officer to help you. But he could probably, give a little bit more information to get you a little closer.
That sounds great. But also it seems like, it sounds, Emily, that we can, if we have questions, we can send them to you and then you can kind of direct us.
Absolutely.
Am I right? Okay.
Absolutely. And that is absolutely, a common part of what we do. It's the thing that you can do that's helpful is if you really providing that specific aims page that says, this is what I'm developing, this is what I want to do in my project, this is what it's ultimately going to be used for. That's really our currency here for figuring out, okay, this is in your institute or my institute, this is your project or my project, this should go to funding opportunity A, B, or C. So reaching out and just saying, hey, I think this is a project that would fit the U44 opportunity you talked about, but I'm not really sure. Can you take a look? We that's a big part of what we do is helping applicants to navigate this space. I just ask that you give us ample time to figure that out, because it can be a slow process, especially during these times when we get a lot of inquiries. So the more time that you can, the more time there is to figure that answer out before you need to apply, the better off you'll be with the timeline.
3 months lead time.
3 months is ideal. 3 months is ideal. But when you're first thinking of it, yeah.
Yeah, but an April 5th deadline is impossible, basically.
Yeah, so that one's hard. I mean, I would definitely not recommend anyone coming in for their first application to start the process a month beforehand. I think if this is looking like of interest, what I would recommend to a company that's going in for their first application is go to AAP, apply to the AAP program. If you get in, they'll help you build that application. They'll help you talk to your program officer. If not, you have now 5 months before you actually apply. And so there's a lot of time to make sure you are targeting the right thing. I have people reach out to me now who are proposing in September, who say, I just want to check that indeed, you agree this is or is not a clinical trial, and, that this is under NINDS. And so, just giving yourself as much time to figure out the right place to go is really in your best interest, because then you can build a proposal that really fits that, instead of 2 weeks before finding out you have to cut your budget by 100K or something. You'll be better off knowing that way in advance.
But if I understood correctly, the AAP is solidly for business, right? It's not a research business deal. Okay.
That's correct. And I don't know of any similar programs that are open to academic applicants. I know there's been discussion about, it'd be really cool if we could do that, but to my knowledge, there's nothing that is available. So that's just for small business applicants specifically. Yeah.
I have a question about who the funding would be going to, such as in the I-Core program? Does it go to the university or goes to the small business?
It goes to the small business. The way that I-Core works is you will get a supplement to the small business, and then a portion of that supplement is used to pay the program. So it's sort of a way on our end to allow research dollars to go to that program. So we give research dollars to the company in the form of a supplement to participate in I-Core. The company uses a part of that supplemental funds to pay the program. And then the remainder of the funds can be used for things like consulting fees to bring in your business expert and have them participate with you on the team.
So the part that the professor involved in, how does it work then? Does it pay for the consulting fee, or how does?
So there could be, so it's a supplement, so it can be structured as far as the teaming, however you want. So if the PI is involved and being paid through their academic role, you could have a subaward to, University of Houston, and then the PI could be, there could be labor for the PI under that subaward. So you can structure it similarly to how you would structure a budget for a grant,
Okay.
but the award would go to the small business, and then there could be subaward to pay for labor that's on the university side.
Is that the same for the C3I too?
I believe so. C3I, C3I might be just free to the company, and we pay for it as a transfer of our funds to the program, of our administrative funds. I believe that's the case. So I believe they're set up a little differently in terms of the money. I believe with C3I, it is just a free program, but there's no support provided to you. And NIH or NINDS basically pays for the slot by transferring some money to the institute that runs it on our behalf.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, guys, for such wonderful questions. Really, these were great, and I encourage you guys to take a look too at that webinar, because a lot of these questions about SBIR versus STTR and those kinds of the budgets, the cycles, the opportunities go into a lot more specific depth in that webinar. So it's absolutely something to check out. I will put that link, highlight it in the list that I send you as well. Because certainly if you're getting ready to the point where you're like, oh, I actually think I'll apply, that level of detail will be really helpful.
That's wonderful. Well, again, this was really great. I'm not sure if we have more questions, but
yeah, I think again, it was great, very useful, very exciting, a lot of opportunities that I think many people in the academia don't think about. I think that's a problem. I don't think that academicians think in a business terms, because I think there still is a lot of separation in people's mind about what an academician does and what an entrepreneurial scientist does. But I think that we arrive at a point now in research in which the two could really be intertwined with each other, and not necessarily in contradiction, or you can still maintain your academic position and maybe push, at least at some point, a product, and then continue your work on in the academia. I think it's very exciting that the NIH is helping us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I think a lot of people just don't, it's an entirely different world, an entirely different skill set. And it can be really intimidating to make that transition. And yeah, I hope, we can try to help make that easier, or, try to help people navigate that, because I agree, it's how new innovative products come to life, is by people taking that leap from that discovery to an application. So yes, I hope we can continue to foster that.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely, it was a
if,
pleasure.
if there are no other questions, I mean, I'm just gonna leave it, I guess, to Dorina. But yeah, thank you again. Yeah, if I think we can conclude here if there are no more questions. But
sure, and I'll follow up to right now an email to you, Dorina, with some of those additional links, and then feel free to distribute them to attendees as you'd like.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Really appreciate
No problem.
your time. And we will
Thank you, guys.
reach out again, as you said.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great connecting with all of you
Yeah.
today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye from Houston.